Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast. And you know what I realized recently? In over a year of doing Good Morning Magic videos, I haven't done a single one that is purely strategy focused. So today I'm going to tell you about one of the biggest deck building mistakes I see players make over and over and over again. I saw it a ton when I was a professional player. I saw it even more when I was looking through hundreds of deck lists every week for my reconstructed column on Daily MTG, and I still see it a ton today. It applies to all formats from standard to modern to draft to even commander, and it's pretty easy to fix if you know what you're looking for. What is it? Well, let me dig into it today. The biggest mistake players make when deck building is not knowing what their deck's plan is, and then not including cards accordingly. When you are building your Magic deck, there are really one of two decks you're going to end up building. There's a pile of cards, and then there is a deck. And in almost all situations, what you really want is a deck. A pile of cards, these are just good cards that hang out together, but probably don't work together. A deck has a vision, a synergy, and a plan, and you always want that plan. A classic example is mono red aggro. You know, attack your opponents, burn them out, all that kind of good stuff. Something I see often is players put 5 and 6 mana cards into these decks because they're really powerful. If you put a card like Inferno Titan, or I guess today it would be a card like Morag, into these decks, when you land it, you're probably gonna win the game. It'll kill your opponent in short order. But there's a problem with that. First of all, there's going to be a lot of games where Morag sits in your hand doing nothing. You'll be trying to curve out, kill your opponent, and you'll have this 6-drop that you maybe can't ever cast sitting in your hand, not helping you out. And then to make matters worse, by the time you can actually cast it, often the game will be decided. Either it's going to be a win more card for you, or your opponent will be stabilized and have a removal spell, and it just isn't going to matter. So it just won't have an impact a lot of the time. Now you're going to remember the games you win with it, which will make it seem awesome, but you kind of forget about all the times it sat in your hand, not doing anything. And so Morag doesn't really fit the plan of this deck. Mono red aggro is about cheap creatures and burning your opponent, and 6-drops just don't really work in there quite as well. Embercleave costs less, so you get a pass. So mana costs is one way to look at this. Am I planning to hit this much mana in my deck's expected game plan? But there's a lot more to it than that. Two other places to look are, is this effect good in my deck? And do I have the time to cast this? For an example of the first one, let's take a look at Song Mad Treachery. Now the barrier to play a modal double-faced card where one side is a land is pretty low, and this has shown up a decent amount in red decks. But it's not very good in a red controlling deck because you're not planning to kill your opponent by damage quickly. Even if you took a big creature like a 5 or 6-drop and attacked your opponent with it, well, that's not really going to help speed you up toward the end of the game because you're going to win with a pretty overwhelming advantage most of the time. So despite costing 5 mana, because it's a land on one side, Song Mad Treachery can be pretty good in both aggressive and mid-range decks, but not so much controlling decks. On the flip side, a card like Omen of the Sea, even though it's only 2 mana, is quite nice in controlling decks, but often you don't want to play it in aggressive decks. Why? Because controlling decks can take the time to get there. They want their decks to go for a very long time, and they'll win the long game. Where an aggressive deck usually can't really afford to take the second turn off just to draw a card. Now let's look at Strix Haven Limited for some more great examples. Let's say you're drafting a white, black, silver quill deck. Well, what cards you want for your deck is really going to depend on your deck's strategy. For example, take a card like Expel. This card is a lot better in a slower controlling deck than a quicker aggressive one. In a slower deck, you're planning to win the long game. So your opponent's going to be attacking you, and you're going to have the time to expel their creatures. Where in a more aggressive deck, you're going to want to be tapping out to play your own creatures and attacking, and your opponent isn't going to be attacking you as much. This isn't to say you should never play Expel in an aggressive silver quill deck, but it's definitely way more valuable in a controlling one. On the other hand, you have a card like Arrogant Poet, which is a lot better in an aggressive deck. You don't care nearly as much about the 2 life that you're paying, and you want to attack your opponent over and over in the air. Where on defense in a controlling deck, well, you can't even block flyers with it. Rise of Exodus is going to be a lot better in a controlling deck, because you're more likely to get up to 6 mana, and that extra card off of Learn can really help turn the tide in your favor. Detention Vortex is a lot better in an aggressive deck, because you want to make your opponent spend a whole turn freeing their creature, or just delay their creature for 1 turn so you can attack past it. So even as you're drafting, if you can figure out if you're a more aggressive, mid-range, or controlling deck, it's really going to inform which cards you want to take for your deck. And this all ties in to the last thing I want to talk about, which I find very helpful, which is for your deck, visualize how the game is going to end. And and then play cards that will help you build toward that endgame scenario. In a mono-red aggressive deck, the game is often going to end with you attacking with a bunch of creatures and maybe pointing a burn spell at your opponent's face. In a more controlling deck, the game is going to end with you having a bunch of lands in play, some cards in your hand, and attacking with one big threat. So how can you build toward those different endgame scenarios? Let's again look at Strix Haven Limited for this. Let's imagine you drafted a blue-green deck, and you have 2 copies of Body of Research. Good job on drafting those. Now, if I'm going to imagine what a board state with this deck might look like when it's winning, it probably has that Body of Research token tapped and attacking your opponent. So it means that cards like Wormhole Serpent and Charge Through, which grant evasion, are really going to go up in your pick order. Similarly, cards like Test of Talents, which protect your creature, might be very relevant, and cards that ramp you into your Body of Research, like Field Trip, are going to be especially good. So visualizing how the game is going to look like when you win can really help you decide what cards will go well in your deck. So to recap, 3 things to keep in mind. First of all, is my deck going to have the mana to cast this card, or a lot of the time is it going to rot away in my hand? Number 2, how does it fit the game plan of this deck? Given whether my deck is more aggressive or controlling, does it make sense that I play this card? And finally, does this card contribute toward how my board is going to look like when the game ends? Will it build toward that end game strategy? Well, that does it for today. A little bit about Magic strategy. I would love to know what you think about this. Did you like a strategy episode where you're like, didn't really care about this? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you like it, I'll do more in the future. I'll talk with you again on Friday. And in the meantime, me your deck have the perfect plan. You got this. Every 2-set block would have names named after foods, and they would go in order of the time of day you would eat those meals. So for example, you had ham and eggs, which would be Ixalan, followed by soup and salad, followed by spaghetti and meatballs, followed by milk and cookies. Easy, right? Well, it was all thrown out of whack almost immediately.